breaking down one of the most important and misunderstood parts of a real estate transaction, escrow.
Whether you're buying, selling, or refinancing, understanding the escrow process can save you time, stress, and even money sometimes.
I'm Isabel Machrone.
And I'm Rosa Ortiz.
We're real estate professionals in Southern California.
And each week we break down what sellers and buyers really need to know right now.
This is Let's Talk SoCal Real Estate. Joining us today, we have Kadie Baldwin with Titan Escrow. Hi, Kadie.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me. My first podcast.
Yay. It's always exciting to do our first. So tell us a little bit about you. How did you get into escrow?
Funny, I kind of fell into it right out of college. My dad he'd been a real estate agent growing up. So I kind of always thought I might end up in real estate someday, but I went to Cal State Fullerton, played softball there, got my degree in kinesiology. For anybody who's not familiar with kinesiology, it's the study of the human body. So like physical therapy, nutrition, exercise physiology, all of those disciplines it required a ton of additional schooling. So once I graduated, in order to get a job in one of those fields, it was going to be like, long story short, 4 more years of schooling. And after playing softball, committing your life to like practice schooling, I was like, I just need a little bit of break.
Yeah. It's like going to medical school, right?
Yes. Yeah. And at the time, the only way to get a job in 2010, 2011 was you had to basically get your doctorate. And I was done a ton of schooling already. So I just took a little bit of break, as any 21-year-old would do after graduating, and was living my best life for 3 months. And then September rolled around and I thought, oh, I need a job. And I fell into a data entry position at an escrow company. And at that time it was fall, I think, of 2011. And so the market had kind of started to pick up after it had crashed. And my role was basically just typical data entry, inputting like parcel numbers, property addresses into this escrow company software. And they gradually just started asking me to do more and more. So ordering payoffs, insurance, more responsibilities. Yeah. And then like by month 5 or 6, they taught me how to do a closing statement, or actually at the time it was a HUD. And so I learned off the HUD form. And once you master a HUD in a closing statement, you've essentially mastered like the financial aspect of things. And once you get to that point, you can essentially handle all the parts of an escrow. So I just kind of moved up the ladder really, really quickly, and then became an escrow officer a handful, probably 5 or so years later, running 2 big refinance accounts. So really just fell into it and just kind of moved my way up the ladder and started basically doing refinances. So I was an escrow officer doing refis for probably the first 4 or 5 years until I started doing resales. But actually doing the refis, I feel like that helped me. Like it trained me. I learned a ton, knew how to do everything, became a refinance pro, and then switched over to doing resales. So I felt like that I prepared me. And then basically when I got thrown into the data entry position, I kind of just got fed to the sharks. Sometimes I feel like that's the best way to learn. It's like you either sink or swim. And that's kind of my story.
So total years of experience as an escrow officer is?
As an escrow officer, gosh, it's 2026. So 11.
Refinancing and resellers. So
yes.
What's the difference there?
So a refinance, I mean, it's just different players, right? A refinance, you're just dealing with the current owner, and they're just refinancing for whether it's a better rate, taking cash out. So it's just a different transaction, where resell is obviously the sale of the property. So you're dealing with buyers, sellers, real estate agents. Where on a refinance, we're just dealing with, the lender and the owner of the property. And from an escrow standpoint, I mean, it's similar. It's just, you're not dealing with as many players on the refinance, and there's not as much to do. There's processing, but it's just a little bit different process.
So now the type of transactions you typically handle are more resale purchases. Do you
mobile homes?
Okay.
Yeah, we do resales, mobile homes, commercial transactions, refinances. So I handle all of those. A little bit of everything. Yes.
Mobile homes. Those are the manufactured homes.
Yes.
What's the difference?
So that's a great question, because there's a little bit of confusion around that. Most don't necessarily understand that they are a little bit different. So whereas on real property, when the structure is attached to the foundation, we have a title company, right? We have a grant deed. It's a real property. That's how the property is transferred. When we have a mobile home, it's titled through the Department of Housing. So essentially like the DMV for our cars, we have the Department of Housing and Community Development, and they handle the titling for the mobile homes. So we deal with them for the entire transaction. And then there's a couple different other entities we're dealing with. We're dealing with the county tax assessor to get in certain things. and we're dealing with a park. So it's just a little bit different where sometimes like a typical transaction is 30 days. A mobile home can sometimes be 45, 60 days just because you're dealing with other entities.
And not every escrow company does those, right?
Correct. Because it's correct. It's not your typical resale transaction. Mm-hmm. So yeah, not everybody does them.
In simple terms, how would you explain escrow?
Escrow, we're just the middleman is what I like to say. We're just a neutral third party. We have to do our due diligence to protect all parties of the transaction. We have certain clients of ours who we work a ton with, but my responsibility is to protect all parties. So we protect buyer, seller, and we're just a neutral third party, right? So our job is to make sure we get that purchase contract and we hold funds. We make sure all documents are in escrow and make sure all the terms of the contract are met before we release money, before we, send that grantee down to get recorded with the county and transfer title. And just as like an escrow officer, we're just kind of like the communication hub behind the scenes, right? We are processing the transaction, communicating with agents, lenders, insurance companies, attorneys.
I just want to emphasize you do so much behind the scenes that it's just unbelievable. But yeah.
Much appreciated. It's nice. And some understand because it is a lot that we're doing. You're going to come up with solutions. Yes.
When does escrow officially begin and end?
So for us, escrow begins when I am in receipt of a fully executed purchase contract signed by all parties. Once that gets sent to me, then we open escrow. And then we send out wire instructions to the buyer right away so we can get that earnest money in. Because once we get that earnest money in, then now we can all start processing the file. So that's what I consider opening escrow. We need that fully executed purchase contract. Wire instructions go out. And then we begin processing our file once that deposit is in.
That's funny you say that because I've been in escrows where, we're calling escrow and we think they have the fully executed contract and they don't, and they really can't do anything. So I'm glad you emphasized not until you have the fully executed contract.
Because a lot of times we get like things piecemealed. So we might get a seller counter offer, but I don't necessarily know what it's countering, right? So like I don't have the full terms because I haven't seen that fully executed contract. So that's why it's our preference to be in receipt of that fully executed purchase contract.
So who are the key players in an escrow?
So on a resale, if we're talking specifically resale, obviously our buyer and seller are most important. And then we have their real estate agent, we have lender, we have title companies. We sometimes have attorneys involved, insurance companies, and then we are dealing with homeowners associations at times. But the biggest key players are obviously our buyer and seller, agents, lender, title companies.
When are attorneys involved?
So you'll have attorneys involved if it's a divorce situation, it could be a probate situation, or certain trust situations. But a lot of times if there's a divorce, there's typically an attorney involved to handle kind of the disbursement of funds. There's some sort of agreement, and we will oftentimes send proceeds to the attorney, and then they'll disperse it once maybe the divorce is not finalized. But yeah, that's when attorneys are involved.
Can you walk us through the process when escrow is open?
We get the contract, we open escrow, we send out wire instructions. When the contract comes in, we also do open title if it hasn't already been opened. Just so we can get the title report, see what's on there. And then, like I said, once the deposit is received, now it's like the green light where we can all begin processing our file. Because sometimes you do get transactions, we get a contract in escrow, buyer gets cold feet or whatever the case may be, but cancels prior to the deposit being sent in. So that's why we say once that deposit is sent in, then that's really the green light for us all to start processing our file. And then we prepare escrow instructions based off the purchase contract. We'll request payoffs, statement of information from buyers, sellers, trying to clear title issues if there's any title issues. And then we're obviously working with the lender to coordinate, get them whatever conditions they need on their end. The loan docs come in, funding, recording, dispersing.
That brings me to what's the longest escrow you've dealt with?
We've had a couple that we've seen like 90-day escrows and no real issue. It's just they're not in a rush or whatever, or they haven't found a replacement property. But we've had some open for 12 months, 13 months. And that's just because they were trying to finalize terms. No big hurry and just finalizing terms. So in that, we kind of just sit back and wait for everyone to communicate with us.
And with that same question, what is the shortest escrow?
5-7 days. If you have an all cash transaction, you could typically, assuming title's clear and everything, you don't need to get payouts or anything. You can get them 5 or 7 days.
Okay. I always put 7 days, but now I know you do it in 5.
Now, if you already have a prelim, that makes it a little bit easier. But sometimes, let's say title's not opened, so we still have to get the prelim, review
paperwork.
Paperwork, Exactly.
What are the major milestones buyers and sellers should expect?
Milestones, obviously, opening escrow is a big one, especially for first-time home buyers. Getting loan docs in, and then recording is the biggest thing, right? Because now once we record, they're now the owner of record, and then just there's disbursement of proceeds to the sellers.
When you say escrow instructions, you're sending checklist to both parties.
So we basically get the purchase contract, review it, put in the numbers like in our system, and then we draft escrow instructions, basically just mutual instructions, just a supplemental instruction based off the purchase contract for everybody to kind of just highlight the terms of the purchase contract. So it'll show if there's a loan amount, the funds to close that the buyer is going to come in with. If there's anything, for instance, like if we see sometimes buyers are waiving home warranty, maybe they're not moving into the property or whatever the case may be. We highlight certain things in our escrow instructions.
So you double check everything.
Yes,
so
correct.
The buyer knows and the seller knows, or mostly the buyer, right? This is for the buyer.
It's for both.
The
escrow, like a summary of the escrow instructions are like a summary of the purchase contract. Okay. An easy, I don't know, it's like a simplified way for the buyer and seller to understand the terms. So we put in certain clauses for them to understand.
What do buyers, what should buyers be doing when they open escrow?
I think the biggest thing for us is communication. So if we, send documents out or we send a request out, just being proactive and prompt and responding to us quickly. A lot of times, I mean, we're sending out like our escrow instructions. And then for the buyer, we need to know like how they want to hold title. So we can prepare the grant deed correctly. Or so the lender, if there's a lender involved, prepares their documents correctly and has their deed of trust read correctly. So for the buyer, it's really just being proactive, responding to us when we request something, or doing their due diligence when it comes to sending in money, because wire fraud is a very, very prevalent thing in the industry. So just doing their due diligence, making sure that when they do get a request from escrow, that they're making sure it is us, right? Just pick up the phone, call us, make sure it's a live human answering, those sorts of things. I would say those are the biggest things for buyers.
And it is very important for us as realtors to really guide them right before opening escrow. We're supposed to instruct them to be time sensitive with the escrow and make sure that they send in that deposit within the first 3 days, that they're communicating with the escrow officer so that you can get your job started.
Earnest deposit, that in good faith, they're putting this deposit saying, I want this house.
Let's explain what happens with that deposit.
Essentially sits in escrow, right? It goes towards their down payment. Now, there are instances where the deposit is agreed to get released to the seller in certain situations, but it really just sits in our trust account and it'll get applied towards their down payment.
What are the biggest mistakes buyers make during escrow?
I would say just maybe not being proactive. You sometimes run into buyers who just kind of want to communicate with their agents because maybe they just don't understand what escrow is. And so not returning paperwork, because we're asking for like vesting and important things. We need insurance information. We need to know who we're requesting insurance from. So I would just say maybe not communicating in a timely manner or returning our documents to us. And then of course, just going back to the wire thing, like just not being proactive, one, either in sending funds or not doing their due diligence. And because we send out, when we send wire instructions, we put a disclosure in the body of our emails and then just say like, you must call in to verbally verify the information with us before wiring as a business and as a company. And then it's for their protection, because if they wire to the wrong place, that money might not be recoverable, protecting ourselves and the client.
And that's a good point that you brought up, that they can call you. A lot of buyers during the escrow or sellers, they think they cannot, or they don't know they can call the escrow directly. You're there for them. You're there to answer any questions if they can't get a hold of their realtor.
Well, exactly. Because like I said earlier, we are essentially like the communication hub escrow. Like I'm talking to the agents. I'm also talking to the lenders. So we're kind of coordinating all parts of it behind the scenes.
And you're unbiased and you're there to
unbiased. Exactly.
Again, to protect both sides.
Protect both sides. Exactly. So we welcome the questions, especially like first time home buyers. I actually love it. When they're very, very nervous to send in their money and they call me 10 times.
Yeah.
They call me before to confirm. They call me when they get to the bank. They call me when the teller is sending off their wire request. They call me as soon as the money is sent. I welcome that because I can appreciate that they're nervous, that they're sending in a large sum of money. Yeah. It's a big step in their life. And so we welcome that. We're always, call us We're here to help you, hold your hand, walk you through everything.
That's awesome. Thank you.
That's great.
What documents or funds should the buyers be prepared for?
Documents, you're going to get escrow instructions from us. We're going to send off like an information request, statement of information, things like that.
Can we talk about, for the sellers, the most important documents? The grant deed is something very important, right?
Yeah. So from the seller, you're going to get escrow instructions. Again, those are mutual instructions for buyer and seller to sign. But then they're going to get the grant deed, which is what essentially transfers ownership once it's recorded. Now, sometimes sellers are a little bit leery to sign that because they think, oh, once I sign it, like I'm giving the property to the buyer, and that's not how it works. It stays in our possession until we are in a position to close. And then we send it off, down to title, who then will send it down to the county for recording. But so it just stays. I always try to let the sellers know, like, that document, just when they're a little bit nervous, that just stays in our possession. I assure you it's under lock and key, and it's not going to be sent anywhere until we're in a position to close. And if for whatever reason the transaction cancels, then it's going to get shredded. And rest assured, the property is not getting transferred, because we have run into issues like that where they're incredibly nervous that they're signing that document.
That's why they prefer sometimes to do it towards the end of it.
Towards the end. Yes. Yes.
So the grant deed is a physical document?
It's a physical document that we prepare, and it's what gets recorded with the county recorder. It's what transfers ownership directly to the buyer.
Well, that gets a little confusing, the grant deed and title. So the grant deed is like the home's birth certificate. It represents the ownership of that home,
of the property. Correct.
What are the common issues sellers run into?
Sellers are more so the ones that we might run into issues with, because you might be dealing with title issues, right? There could be a lien or a judgment. We see liens with Franchise Tax Board. We see liens with the IRS. And when you're dealing with government entities, those are, for instance, like the IRS, we sometimes don't get demands from them for 4 to 6 weeks. They move at their own pace, right? It's the government.
Yes.
So that definitely delay a transaction. Another big thing we see on the sell side is now solar. It's a huge issue, because, we've had a ton of solar companies who have gone bankrupt, and they're now being serviced by new companies.
You're trying to run around and find who it is.
You're trying to run around and figure out who services it. And then you do. And sometimes these companies have acquired so many, bankrupt companies that they're at a 6 to 8 week, let's say, turn time. And we have a 30-day escrow, but they're telling us they're not able to get the transfer documents out for possibly 60 days. That's going to delay something. And unfortunately, it's something that's outside of our control. But we do see that. We are now seeing where they actually require that the seller call in and initiate the solar transfer. Whereas in years past, I could just call in and give all of the information, and they would deal directly with. Now they want seller to be the first line of communication. Seller has to give our contact information, also give buyer contact information. Mm-hmm. So it's just, that's been a little bit challenging, because as escrow, like I said, we're the processing hub or communication hub. We don't mind doing those things. We do a lot of the legwork, but now, unfortunately, we've got to prep our sellers now that, unfortunately, you're going to have to sit on the phone potentially for long hold times to provide the requested information. So we have seen solar just being a big pain for all of us involved in the transaction.
I've worked with you a couple of times, Kadie, and I know that you catch these things right in the beginning of opening escrow. So it kind of gives you a little bit of better timing to tackle these situations if you run into them. Because I know that I've been in escrows where they don't catch it till the end. Right?
Yeah. And that could be because, to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, they could be very, very busy, right? Sometimes it's an easy miss on a prelim, maybe the way that it's written on the prelim. But I always recommend, the minute an agent gets a listing, open a prelim and then send it my way. And even maybe an offer is not going to get accepted for 30 to 60 days, whatever the timeline is. But at least I have a prelim, and I know, oh shoot, there's a judgment on there. Let's get working on that. Or maybe it's not our owner, but we can get a statement of information ahead of time and clear those things up front. So I always say the sooner you can get a prelim opened, the better, because it allows us to catch those things. Mm-hmm. But from the way, like I work, as soon as maybe we don't have a prelim open right away, well, as soon as it comes in, we get eyeballs on it. Whether it's myself or my assistant, we're looking at it, and that's what we're looking for before anything. We're scrolling through to see, are there liens? Are there judgments? Is there something recorded for solar? Do we notice maybe nobody told us that there was an HOA? but the property type says it's a PUD or it's a condo. So we try to eyeball that at the minute we see the prelim so we can catch those things.
Awesome. So besides the seller being proactive, just like we want buyers to be proactive, we want the sellers to communicate with these solar companies if there is a solar involved, or if there's any liens. So we want them to kind of be proactive.
Exactly.
What else can sellers do to keep things moving smoothly?
Same thing as buyers, respond to our requests in a timely manner. And, for a seller, it's the only way we can transfer titles if we have a clear title. So really, it's more important for us on the title side for the sellers to be getting us everything we need. So sellers communicate with us when we reach out to them. It's also helpful if they understand kind of a little bit of the process, because for instance, sometimes sellers, they think, okay, they signed a contract and that's really all they have to do. And we might have 30-day close and they think they're going to get funds right as soon as we close. And that sometimes doesn't happen because there's a buyer's lender involved. There's a recording process involved in California. So I always like sellers to kind of just understand the process. And they're going to receive their proceeds, for instance, typically within 24 hours of recording.
Exactly why we brought this podcast together, is just to really educate and help buyers and sellers understand the whole behind the scenes.
Yeah, because especially in California is so different. We're very, very different in the way we do things compared to other states. You have other states where everything happens all at once at the closing table, funding, recording, disbursement. It's very, very different. We have attorney states. Yes.
We've heard physically everybody's sitting around the table.
At the closing table, or, somebody's buying a property in, another state and they actually have to go out there. Whereas in California, we can utilize mobile notaries.
Kadie, what are the fees that buyers and sellers should expect?
I mean, for a transaction, you're going to have escrow fees, title fees, you're going to have recording fees paid to the county recorder. There's going to be transfer taxes that the seller pays. Basically, your typical closing costs, right? Seller is going to typically pay a commission. They're going to pay transfer taxes.
You do provide a seller an estimated sheet.
An estimated net sheet. We refer to it as a closing statement. Agents typically refer to it as a net sheet. So we know exactly what they're asking for. And yes, that's going to break down. It's theoretical. Of course, it's an estimate, right? Something might get added after the fact. Maybe they're going to give a credit during the transaction, but for the most part, it's going to show them their estimated net proceeds that they can expect. It'll show payoff. It'll show title and escrow fees. It's going to show transfer taxes. It'll show commissions. It'll break everything down that they're going to be responsible for, prorations, things of that nature.
If we can provide something like that up front, that's always the best way.
Yeah. And knowing if they have a mortgage, knowing roughly what that balance is key. Sometimes we'll get the principal balance and it's not necessarily taking into consideration that there is also interest that they're going to have to pay. So we may prepare a net sheet with a $500,000 principal balance, but there still is, interest. We don't know the interest rate until we get a payoff demand. So I would always estimate a couple thousand higher on the payoff if you don't necessarily know kind of like what the actual payoff amount is. Rule of thumb, just add a couple $1,000, just a little cushion to be safe.
That makes sense.
So prorations are done basically just to divide expenses fairly between buyer and seller based on the dates that they own the property. So for taxes in California, we pay taxes twice, and we basically prorate taxes based on the date that they own the property. So for instance, the first installment of taxes, which are due in December, cover dates from July to the end of December. And then the second installment, due in April, delinquent in April, covers January to June. So our job is to prorate accordingly. So buyer and seller are charged and credited correctly. So if seller, let's say we're beginning of May and seller's already paid the second half taxes, we want to make sure they get credited back those days that they don't necessarily own the property. If we close May 15th, they shouldn't be responsible from May 15th to the end of June. So we want to make sure that they get credited correctly.
That is a common question I get asked when a seller just finished paying their property taxes and they're like, well, how am I going to get that money back? And then I have to explain that it's prorated and it's credited back.
Yep. A lot of times we have to kind of direct them to the proration line because they don't see it. But yes, that's exactly why we do it. And same thing with association dues. If we're closing, let's say middle of May, and they already paid May association dues, we want to make sure they get credited back for those 15, 16 days, whatever it is, that they don't own the property. And then it's the buyer's responsibility to pay those 15 days. So yes, we do all of that through escrow so everybody is credited and debited correctly.
One of the things that we didn't cover that is a very important form to verify that the parties are who they say they are is a statement of information. Can you explain how you verify that the person is who they say they are?
Yeah. So, I mean, from our escrow, we actually request copies of driver's licenses because sometimes, if you apply for a loan, you typically do have to provide the lender your driver's license. But sometimes we have all cash transactions. So there is no lender involved. So first and foremost, we request copies of driver's license just so we know who we are dealing with. And then a statement of information is extremely important, especially on the seller side, because we could have individuals, for instance, like a Jose Martinez or a John Smith. So a statement of information is incredibly important to get over to our title companies so they can clear any liens, any judgments that might not be our clients. When, an offer is accepted, we've already know seller's clear. There's nothing on there. And if there is something, we've taken care of it well in advance.
Isn't there a new rule for cash buyers?
You know what? So we did a ton. It was basically FinCEN. We were going to have to provide a ton of information to the federal government. They're a department of the U.S. Treasury, but there was a court case in Texas or a different state. And actually all that training that we had to go through back in February, it got ruled out. So all of those FinCEN changes are no longer in existence, at least at this moment in time, as of May 6th. So all of that, where we're going to have to do different levels of reporting, that is not in effect at this moment. That's not to say it's not going to change, but they, at this time, threw all of that out.
Okay, great.
What's the one thing agents wish their clients knew or understood? What do you run into a lot that you are like, I wish the agent showed the client?
So a lot of times in terms for like the seller, they're calling me, asking me why they don't have their money when we record it at 5:00 on Friday. Mm-hmm. And so I wish there was a little bit more, I wish they were just, the timing expectations. They understood that. Like I said, we have the lender, the funding, we have lender funding. Then we have recording with the county, and then funds come to escrow. So, wires are going multiple places before I have all of the money.
Everything cleared. Yeah.
Everything cleared, and then can wire out to our seller. And there is a wire cutoff time in the United States. It's typically around 3:30 p.m. So if we get recording confirmation on a Friday at 4:30, 5:00, we're well past wire cutoff. And that means I'm not going to have money from title until Monday morning, which means in turn, sellers not going to get their money until Monday. I would love it if sellers were a little bit more aware of the timing process, because we do sometimes have them call asking like, how come I don't have money yet? I don't want to give keys until I have money. And it's like, well, the recording is essentially ownership's been transferred. So we do get calls like that often, that they don't want to hand keys over because they haven't been paid. So I think that is a really, really important thing that sellers understand, that at the end, that ownership is going to get transferred once that deed records. Maybe really expect that you're going to have money that minute. You'll have funds within 24 hours. Now, if we're talking on a Friday, you're unfortunately going to have money the following Monday.
That's a great tip, Kadie, for the realtors.
Yeah. So if we're just in a normal business week and we close Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, it's normal expectation is they're going to have money the next business day. Very typical. We get recording confirmation in the afternoon. So 3-4 o'clock, which puts us past that wire cutoff. But we're typically wiring out the next morning to our sellers. And once we wire out, they have funds within 1 or 2 hours.
You and your team are very good about that, creating that urgency, because that's obviously a very important part.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Can you tell us
a good story?
When we're dealing with first-time home buyers, right? It's a huge moment in their lives, and we're seeing sometimes younger and younger buyers. If I see a birth date of like 96, 97, 98, sometimes 2000s now, because we're in 2026, and they're just so excited. That is when my job is rewarding, because they're so happy and they're so thankful. So I love moments like that when we're dealing with our sellers. Sometimes, they're selling this house because they're buying their dream house, right? This was just a startup for them. And we're sending money, their proceeds, to maybe another escrow company or a new builder because they're buying their dream house. So for me as escrow, those are like kind of moments that stand out to me when I'm dealing with the first time home buyers, or we're helping sellers get into, their dream house or whatever their situation may be.
That's true.
But those are kind of things that stand out for me.
That's it. Those are beautiful moments. Where can people reach you?
You guys can email me, find me on social media. It's my first and last name. Very, very easy. Kadie Baldwin.
Our
So
last name.
Right?
Well, we'll definitely include your information on our link below.
We're always happy to help. I appreciate you guys having me on. My very first podcast experience.
And you did amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
If this episode helped you, be sure to subscribe, follow, and share it. And tune in for new episodes wherever you listen to podcasts.
And if you're thinking of buying or selling in Southern California,
Click the link in the show notes for your free buyer's guide. And if you have any questions, email us. We'd love to answer them all on the upcoming episodes.
Isabel Machrone and Rosa Ortiz are licensed real estate agents with Keller Williams College Park. Each Keller Williams office is independently owned and operated.
the information shared in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and reflects our personal opinions and experiences. It should not be considered legal or financial advice.
We make no guarantees regarding accuracy, timelines, or results. We always recommend consulting with licensed professionals and doing your own research before making any real estate decisions.